I'm not sure whether Zelda 2 has always had a reputation for being difficult, but it certainly has one now. While the game has its challenges, I feel like with a little knowledge about how the game works, a few basic strategies, and thinking of the game like the action RPG that it is, I can help you conquer this game. I'm going to break down some mechanics, give you some strats, some ways to think about the game, and give you a general flow to follow. I won't be guiding you through the palaces in a go here, turn there type of way, with the Great Palace as a bit of an exception. If you end up lost, I recommend grabbing a map online to supplement this video. Alright, let's get to what you need to know. Your goal is to put the gems back in 6 palaces and get the Triforce of Courage from the 7th Great Palace. Along the way, we'll pick up 8 magic spells, 8 items, 4 hearts, and 4 magic containers. The game wants you to explore, and the original booklet is surprisingly informative, and the townsfolk give you some pretty good information. It's also critical to understand that this game is an action RPG and not a game where you should fight every enemy. Each enemy needs to be measured in terms of effort versus gain, and farming a little at the right time to top up your magic or XP can keep you alive. I want to be clear that by farming, I don't mean grinding for levels, as you'll naturally be pretty close to max level by the end of the game anyway. Everything else I want to cover requires some context, so let's move on to some mechanics. Link is 2 blocks tall and holds a shield that can be used to block most enemy weapons, but not an enemy physically touching him. There are 4 weapons that the shield can't block unless you have a reflect spell active. You're armed with a tiny sword, and when you're at full health, it'll shoot a beam that travels 4 blocks distance. The beam sword will generally hit small enemies and deal no damage to large ones, although there are a few exceptions to both. You'll also gain the ability to do both an upstab and downstab later in the game, which can be used to hit enemies directly above and below you while jumping. Your standing and ducking attacks bring you to a complete stop, whereas the jump attacks do not. This is important in that you have momentum and don't hit full speed until you've moved a few blocks. This will be important later for chasing down certain enemies. Your jump height and distance are affected by momentum as well, and with a little run you can make jumps that are 3 blocks high and cross 4 tile gaps. The jump spell will allow you to clear 4 blocks high and could probably clear about 5 blocks if there were any gaps that required it. Mercifully, when hit, you also get about a half second of invincibility, or iframes, which you can use to run past frustrating enemies. This game has a leveling system for life, magic, and attack damage with a maximum level of 8 for each. After you reach 8 in everything, you just get a 1-up for every 9000 XP. You gain experience from enemies, P-bags, and jamming crystals into the foreheads of statues. The amount of XP you get from an enemy is the number that floats up after their death, but some don't give any XP at all. Conveniently, the XP won't count if you left the room before that number disappears. When you complete a palace, your XP meter will completely fill no matter how much you had left to go. Ideally, you want to strategize this XP gain. If you're within striking distance of leveling up, you might as well go find a few enemies to kill to get you over that hump, so that when you kill the boss you get a second level up. Leveling up life decreases the damage you take, for magic it decreases the cost of spells, and attack increases the damage you do. You might consider the system kind of like buying a level with XP that you have. When you reach the XP goal in the top corner, the game brings up a level menu and offers you anything that costs what you have or less, or you can keep your amount and just keep saving for a different level. How you choose to apply the levels depends on how you want to play. The attack levels cost a lot in the early game, and many more advanced players will save up and go all in on offense for a while just following the game's natural order is a bit more of a defensive strategy, since it's weighted towards magic and life levels early on. There's some risk to waiting, because when you game over you lose all the XP that you haven't cashed in. Each bar in your magic and life meters is worth 16, and each heart or magic container adds 1 bar. So, when you reach level 4 magic and the shield spell has decreased cost to 16, it'll cost you 1 bar to cast. If you want to be hardcore, you don't need any of the heart containers, but to beat the game normally you do need all the magic. You need the number of blocks in your magic bar equal to the spell's position on the list in order to even get the spell. You're most likely to run into this trying to pick up Thunder since you need all 8 bars, and the old man will tell you to get lost. As mentioned earlier, the 8 spells decrease in cost with levels, but not evenly. For example, Life and Fairy start out at a moderate cost and never really get that cheap, whereas Fire, Spell, and Reflect all start out super expensive and end up among the lowest cost. Shield will reduce your damage by half and give you a funky fresh red tunic. Jump gives you a lot more height and a little more distance to your jumps. Life will restore 48 or 3 blocks worth of health and will help you drag your broken body through the game. Fairy is among the more useful spells for survival or laziness, turning you into a fairy to fly around wherever you want. It is required for a few palace obstacles, but you can also fly through locked doors if you don't have a key, pick up items that don't require you to stab them, so not keys or pea bags, and is good for desperate times like saving yourself from a hole. Fire is a terrible spell that allows you to shoot a fireball from your sword. Some enemies can only be damaged with fire magic, but none of them are important. Reflect allows you to bounce back wizard magic, but it has a hidden feature of allowing you to block all those other weapons your shield normally can't, making some later game enemies pretty trivial. Spell turns most enemies into bots, but is really just required to get one plot item. Thunder does an enormous amount of damage to all enemies on screen, and is required to fight the penultimate boss, Thunderbird. A lot of online guides say that it kills all non-boss enemies, which is just not true. I don't know how much damage it does, but frankly it doesn't matter since it costs too much to be practical anyway. Your magic is refilled with blue and red magic jars, blue refilling 16 or 1 bar worth, but red jars will give you the amount that would fill your whole meter from empty, no matter how much magic you have when you get it. You can take advantage of this by casting spells as it fills, as long as you get the spell in before it reaches full. Fairies fully heal you, and Link dolls give you a 1-up, but there's only 6 dolls in the game and they never come back. Pea bags throw you some extra XP, and ones that didn't drop from an enemy also never come back. There are certain places where you can find red jars or fairies, and in practical terms they don't come back till you game over. The remaining items are mostly to get you past various barriers, and I'll just cover those as we go through the game later. With overworld enemy spawns, the bots are the easy groups and the monster things are the harder groups. The overworld tile you are stepping to determines what the environment is, and the roads are always safe. Some enemies spawn infinitely, some respawn when you leave the room, and others will stay dead until you leave the palace or cave system entirely. You can basically just scale this from the weakest ones come back right away, and the strongest stay dead much longer. The bosses that you kill will never come back, including the Thunderbird in the Great Palace. So, if you forget to get a palace item or die to Shadow Link, you don't have to worry about redoing the boss battle. Enemies belong in 3 groups, and 2 of those groups will drop an item every 6 kills. Every 6 enemies you kill in the small drop group have a 7/8 chance of dropping a blue jar and a 1/8 chance of a 50 pea bag. Every 6 for the large drop group have a 50-50 chance of either a red jar or a 200 pea bag. The 3rd group will never drop anything. Bubbles will make you lose magic when you touch them, and there are other enemies that will drain either 10 or 20 XP on contact, which is not only enraging, but means that you need to be especially careful around them. Even though we have pretty forgiving iframes with Link, enemies do not, and you can often stun lock them in a stab fest or dance on their head with a down stab. You can also walk through them during the half second or so after they're hit, and this can be used to walk through inconvenient enemies unmolested. Enemies with shields have a weakness around their face or forehead and should generally be attacked aggressively with jump stabs before they can get their attacks going. Many of the larger Link-sized enemies also like to keep a specific distance from you and will generally telegraph their attacks. It's important to game this desire to maintain certain distances. First, it means retreating will drag an enemy with you, luring it away from the edge of the screen, other enemies, pits, or anything else. Second, it means you need to chase some enemies down because they'd rather stand a bit away from you and throw things. Besides this, larger enemies will kind of bounce away when you hit them, which is actually ideal for timing your hits in between their swings. You stab, they bounce away and miss, you run after them, repeat. Everything else about enemies and bosses I'm going to talk about as we go through the game. Let's face it, you're gonna die in this game, so let's talk about what happens when you do, and why getting a game over might not be such a bad thing, or could even be a good plan. When you die, you'll be sent back to the start of the room you were in, from the direction you entered, with full life and full magic. When you game over, you'll be sent back to Zelda's Slumber Chateau and have to walk your sad self back to wherever you left off. That is, unless you get a game over in the Great Palace, where as long as you press continue, you'll start right at the front door. You'll also see the counter under your name and the file select go up by 1, your XP will be set to 0. You can also manually cause a game over by pressing up A on the second controller. Other than that, all progress like earned levels, items acquired, bosses killed, and palaces done will remain complete. My best advice for saving yourself sadness and frustration is try not to game over close to a level up. Eke out that last little bit of XP before you die so that the progress is not lost. More importantly, if you're setting out into a late palace or death mountain or something, maybe going in there with one life left is a bad idea. Just swallow your pride, fire yourself into a pit, save and reset, then tackle it with a full 3 lives. Now that we've covered what I see as the more helpful mechanics, I just have a few parting strategies before you set out on the adventure of Link. 1. Never pass by a place where you can fully heal and or get full magic. Palace entrances, towns, a stray red jar, it'll all keep you going. 2. I have to reiterate that you need to pick your battles. Some enemies are just more pain to fight than their XP payout is worth. An easy example is if you're at the end of a palace. Almost leveled? Go find some enemies. No chance of leveling? Start skipping fights. 3. Don't be afraid of using magic. Blue jars drop every 6 small enemies, and there's no reason to walk by one without casting a cheap spell like Shield or Life if you're hurting. There are only maybe 2 places in the game where there are no enemies to get blue jars from, and you need magic. On entering a palace, make sure you go in there with full magic and health. In palaces 2, 3, 4, and 6, you can stab at the Iron Knuckle statue at the entrance for a chance at a red potion. I say chance because in palaces 3 and 4, it could be an Iron Knuckle. If you get an Iron Knuckle, just exit and re-enter to try again. Inside the palaces, take a stab at statues or heads as you pass by as well. These too can contain red potions or Iron Knuckles. It is random which one you get, although in palaces 1, 2, and 5, it will always be a red jar. Lastly, before we get going, let's talk about enemy spawns on the overworld. They appear both over time and steps taken, and there are 2 ways you should be trying to take advantage of them. First, they will override event tiles, as in fixed tiles on the overworld that have specific enemy encounter. In some places you should be trying to walk onto a fixed event tile at the same time an enemy is, allowing you to skip a more challenging area. The second is that in areas with particularly frustrating encounters, like graveyards, you should step off the road to cause enemies to appear, then quickly go back onto the road to have an enemy-free encounter. This resets the enemy spawn counter to 0 and allows you to take the most steps before enemies will appear again. I think that's enough about how the game works, so let's cover the order of events. There are parts of the game where you can do things in a different order from me, so you can consider this to be, in my opinion, a safe, conservative route. I'm also not going to put any of the overworld jars, Link dolls, or P-bags in the interest of time.
3, 2, 1, let's go.
We start off sneaking away while Zelda naps, and right away there's a cave to the south holding our first magic bottle. Yeah, it's dark in there because we don't have the candle yet, but you can still see enemies walking on the ground in dark caves, and at the end for the Octoroks, it's pretty simple to patiently block their rocks and stab a bit blindly to kill the 3 of them. Having this bottle will give you a little extra use of the shield magic in the first palace. Speaking of which, head east to the town of Rauru and grab the shield spell. No side quest is required for this one, and of course, like all towns, there are ladies who restore magic and health. Let's head towards our first palace, which is in the desert to the northeast. Pass through the cave, watch the floor for the one enemy, and start heading east then south along the coast. Sitting amid the ring of trees, we can get our first heart container, guarded by a boomerang man. This is as good a place as any to talk Garegga technique. A telegraph throwing high or low, but the boomerang has several different possible paths, sometimes forcing you to turn around to block it. These are another enemy that like to keep their distance, and it's generally best to try and pin them to a wall to kill them quickly. Now we have our first heart, so let's head back north to the first palace. There's no red jar at the entrance statue, so we're going in with what we got. Overall, this palace is quite straightforward, and here we're going to pick up the candle which lights up all the caves. As mentioned before, there are a lot of enemies unique to palaces, so we'll meet several here for the first time. Wosu are these annoying bouncing rats that steal your XP and give none back. We'll encounter one type of Stalfos as well, one that doesn't jump. Simply keep stabbing their bony knees to bounce them away as they whiff with their sword. Bubbles are new too, which are incredibly predictable, and if you are in need of 50 XP and have some patience, you can sit there and stab them for a slow kill. You can also basically control where they go by sliding the edge of the screen around on them. Gooma is another palace enemy who basically acts like a hammer brother. In his pattern, there will be a break in the flow for you to sneak inside the arc, and then you're pretty safe to just stand close by and stab him. Our last new enemy is the Iron Knuckle, a Zelda staple if there ever was one. Just stay aggressive before he has a chance to start stabbing too much, and repeatedly jump stab him in the face. The last boss is Horsehead and will take a swing with its mace anytime you're in striking distance. I find it best to take running duck stabs, aiming for what feels like his ears. Go in for one hit and back away while the boss whiffs on its attack. Give him a couple of ear stabs, get the XP, and we're done. Our next stop is the Tantari Desert. Take a trip to the end of the cave for a trophy. Be patient with the bats and Octoroks, otherwise you're going for a lava swim. After we've got it, head to Ruto to trade the trophy for the jump spell and head south. The cave here is pretty benign with just a couple of boomerang boys and a new red bat that turns into a devil thing that spits fire when it lands. Our next goal is to head to the town of Saria to the south. It'll be our sanctuary for now, but is unfortunately a bit of a hike. Thankfully, the main road and bits of road in the swamp can be used to get around relatively pain-free. Drop by this forest to visit Bagu, a hermit hanging out amid a sea of event tiles here. Speaking to him will allow you to cross the river in Saria later. On the bridge to the south, we'll have our first encounter with a bonefish called Bago Bago. If they're coming at you from behind, I find it generally reasonable to just keep walking, then turn around and duck stab them as they land. If they're coming at you from the front, they will hit you if you don't stop and duck, or stab them as they come up at you. Watch out for their knee-level rocks as well. The town of Saria is one of two towns where the Eyes of Ganon exist, aka loser townfolk that turn into bats and hit you in the face after you talk to them. I recommend trying to talk to them from as big a distance as you can get if you're going to try and pick up the legit game clues as you go through. Besides that, we have our wonderful life spell, which is either too expensive or barely affordable to cast right now, and is granted in exchange for finding a mirror under a table. This is a point where people diverge in where to go next, because you can go south to Death Mountain, which allows you to do Palace 2 with a down stab, an extra magic and heart container, and the fairy spell. My personal recommendation though, is that Death Mountain is a bit of a marathon and tricky to survive at these levels. It's simply easier to do the second palace first. So let's head back north along the road where we need to head into Medoro Swamp. This is our first palace where the entrance statue has a red jar, and remember that palaces 1, 2, and 5 will never have surprise iron knuckles that spring out to jam a knife in your eye. Just keep walking in and out of the palace to fill up your magic and health, then head in. Our second palace isn't too mazy, but I'll save everyone some time by saying don't cross the lava pit until you've picked up 2 keys. Speaking of which, make damn sure there isn't a blob on the other side of pit jumps or you're asking to take a hot bath. I'll also warn you that this palace is probably the worst literal dead end in the game. Do not go down these collapsing tiles unless you have a key or at least have enough magic to cast jump to get out. There are no enemies to get magic from down there, and the next room is locked. If you get trapped, all you can do is die to regain the magic to jump out. The palace treasure here is the handy glove, allowing us to break these square bricks with our sword. As far as enemies and hazards go, we get introduced to a few new ones. First, there are the bleeding pillars whose blue drops will spawn enemies. Red iron knuckles are just a little stronger than the orange ones. And these stupid head turrets are new. They shoot balls that can be blocked but are obnoxious to get past, especially in later rooms where they're on both sides and you're fighting an enemy. Stalfos will jump now, but the same strategy of knee stabbing applies. If they take a jump at you, just commit and walk towards them and they'll land on your other side. We meet the Fire Moa. It is simply a nuisance and steals your XP on hit, so don't let it hit you in the elevator. Then there will be Ra. He steals our XP too and has a similar pattern to Medusa heads in Castlevania. Like that game, if you just keep walking you won't generally take a hit, but unfortunately there are usually distractions requiring you to stop or jump, meaning we're going to end up dancing around to avoid or kill them. Lastly, we have our boss Helmet Head. This guy will take damage in the face and every few hits launch a helmet into the air to fly around and shoot at us. Since there can be up to 2 of those things flying around, it is in our best interest to kill him as quickly as possible to avoid having too much crap flying around. Alright, with that done, we are 2 palaces down. The gloves don't really let us do anything in the overworld, so unless you went south earlier, then now's the time to head all the way through Saria to Death Mountain. This place is a literal maze and has some spicy encounters with some new axe-happy friends. The maze part is easier than it looks though. Simply take the rightmost cave every time, and inside caves where you need a 4-way intersection, take the bottom right. Our only new enemy here is the Dairas. The orange guys swing fast and have a big reach, and the axes can't be blocked without the reflect spell. If you're on the same level as them, just keep bouncing them back with a quick stab between their hits. They can be off level from you, which is kind of annoying, so I recommend trying to time a jump stab in the same way. The red ones are a little bit different since they throw their axes, but they hold a position a few tiles away. So simply let them come in, jump their axe for a stab, go back to your spot, rinse and repeat. Following this log, take a quick jump down the hole to pick up the hammer, bottom right at the intersection again folks. Then smash the neighboring boulder for a magic potion upgrade. There's nothing else down here, since this area is just an artistic representation of the first Zelda game, so head back north along the coast. Once we cross the bridge, just stay out of the graveyard and we have access to a whole new town, Muda. Grab the down stab which is found inside the upper door of the church. To get the fairy spell we'll need a medicine from the swamp cave way in the west, and we may as well grab the heart container from this cave while we're at it. With that done, we're all set up to hit the last palace in the west. Okay, so fighting battles in the graveyard is a bad idea, but that's where we're going. Head in from the north so that we only have 4 tiles to cross before at the King's Tomb. Game the spawns to get the road battle, then head straight south from the King's Tomb until we land in a cave that'll take us out to the 3rd palace. Here's a reminder that this is the first palace where those statues that hold red jars now have a 50-50 chance of being an Iron Knuckle. Yes, even if he's stuffed into one tile like some sort of clown car. Don't worry though, if you get one at the entrance, just keep going in and out of the palace till it's the jar you need and everything's full up. This is an awfully linear palace, and I need to tell you that there isn't a single reason to use the jump spell anywhere in it. There are 4 tile gaps and 3 tile vertical jumps throughout, but god damn it you can do it. I believe in you. The palace treasure is the raft, which will only do us good on the overworld. As far as enemies go, we're introduced to a new obnoxious enemy called Doom Knocker, and man is this guy annoying with his boomerang hammers. Frankly, I find it easier for now to take advantage of the down stab and bounce past him to freedom, since at this level he does a ton of damage and only gives 100 XP. Stalfos start getting some armor, but otherwise act the same. There will be a new annoying XP thief that zigs and zags shooting at you who isn't much of a threat, except when you're trying to dig yourself free from blocks with no upstab to get you out. I got nothing, it's just patience that'll solve this one damage free. We're also going to run into Blue Iron Knuckles, a harder, better, faster, stronger version like we've never seen before. And he's the boss of this palace too. These guys throw their swords and let out bursts of rapid shots. They do maintain a short distance, so try and be patient to wait for a gap and go in for the attack. They have the same weak point as everyone else, the face. The boss version just takes a couple of down stabs to get him off the horse, then is otherwise just an Iron Knuckle. Following this little island adventure, let's head back to Muda and take a quick cruise to Eastern Hyrule. Just to the east is the town of Nabooru, which is truly going to be our last base of operations for almost the rest of the game. The lands around here have Tektites, Basilisks, and other enemies that can only be damaged with a fire spell. Usually, I just ignore these types of enemies, but the fire spell is cheap and they are easy XP. Nabooru is where we can pick up the fire spell in exchange for giving this lazy lady some water from the fountain. If you're running around picking up hints from the townsfolk, the River Devil refers to the friendly spider to the south. The original Japanese sprite made more sense. So let's follow the road north through a one-room, no-threat cave. Seriously, just bounce over the damn lizards. And we're gonna hang a right and mosey over to Labyrinth Island. David Bowie isn't here, but a small child is if you just stick to the bottom, then rightmost path and rescue him. There's a lizard version of an Iron Knuckle here who's dealt with as usual, jump stabs to the eye. Leave the island and head all the way back west to the mountain town of Darunia for the first and last time. Seriously, it's too far a walk, and if you need to heal, just go through the cave to Nabooru instead. Darunia's our second town with the Eyes of Ganon, so watch out for bat people. There's another knight hanging out in a locked building that you can pull a Santa Claus to get to, and this guy will give you the up stab. Our rescued child grants us the magic spell of Reflect, a necessary but also underrated spell. With it, you can block all the stuff like fireballs, clubs, axes, and totally trivialize some irritating enemies, should you be willing to use the magic to cast it. More importantly, it bounces back Wizrobe's magic wave. Anyway, we're done here and never coming back, so make your way back east to the Maze Island. The maze here has a significant number of event tiles on it, but there are ways to navigate it all with only hitting one or two of them. There's also a magic bottle to get. Okay, so Palace 4 has the water walking boots, which are a lot less useful than they sound. Take a right turn on entry, not that you have any choice, and don't come back to go left until you've picked up the boots. This place has a number of lava pits you need to be real careful about, and a hole that's both safe and necessary to fall into. My biggest advice here is that you should consider killing Wizrobes when you see them, as they're basically free 100 XP each, and there's usually 2 or 3 in that room. Doom Knockers aren't as dangerous now that we've leveled a bit, so I usually start fighting them in this palace. The boss, Karok, is a guy you need Reflect to kill, so just park yourself in a corner and hope he doesn't appear on you too many times. Easy peasy. Following this, we can now walk on some water, including the river to get off this island. With the boots, we can now take a shortcut from the other end of the bridge down to Nibiru. Stop in town for health and magic since there's no red jar at the entrance of the next palace. While we're on our way walking east, take a quick jog north to grab our second last heart container. Now we're as ready as we're gonna get, so take a step inside. The palace on the sea is a long one, but we can stab at statues all day here without risk of getting an iron knuckle, so there's that. It's also the only one besides the Great Palace that really features dead ends. The townsfolk mention a false wall, hence the dead ends, aka false walls. This marathon palace is really only difficult due to its length. The enemies are pretty benign. My single biggest piece of advice is when you come across this room, turn around. This room is a death trap and a true dead end on the other side. Our only new enemy is our fiery friend Margot, who's easy to get 200 XP out of, but pretty boring to kill. Their fire travels about 3 blocks, and if their fire isn't close enough to hit you, you're not close enough to hit them either. You won't make it before they move. The boss, Guma, has long range, hits like a brick, and his head is invulnerable. He'll start with winding up his flail as soon as you're close, and it's hard to get out of the way before committing to an attack. I recommend casting jump, running in, taking a stab, and jumping away. If you only swing once, you should be okay to get out of there without being hit. Now that we have the flute, you can remove the spider south of Nibiru. Welcome to the last region of the game, where the safety of a town is always far away and the enemies are ruthless. On the road south of the spider, there are 3 areas to get through where lizard men pelt you with rocks from above. The first one can be gamed by dragging an enemy south from the tile the spider was on, but there's no real avoiding the next 2. Get your bullet hell pants on and just run through them. Passing the graveyard, we're headed south along the road across the bridge to the east. That town you see, don't even bother. The southeast corner of the beach has our last heart container, then we'll peel north through the woods and into the cave. The cave isn't too threatening, but don't be afraid of spending magic to cut down the Tektites and lizard dudes because the hidden town of Gasudo is right on the other side. Once we're out, chop down the trees and voila, a marginally useful town. Here we have a few things to pick up. Our last magic container from the old woman, the spell, and at the end of the town, use that spell to pick up the magic key. The magic key just opens all locked doors we encounter in all 1 remaining palaces that have them. Once everything's done here, we're headed back south to the beach, where we'll stand amid the stones and use the flute to summon the penultimate palace. Once again, the towns are all far away, so don't be afraid to exit and re-enter the palace repeatedly until the red jars have you maxed out. So here we are at our last proper palace, and this one's gimmick is holes that take you from one section to another. First off, besides the one you enter the palace with, don't bother taking elevators down. The only elevators here are to get yourself out of a hole you fell in. We'll also find 2 of the previous Iron Knuckle on a horse bosses in this dungeon. To save some backtracking and confusion, stay on the top floor without going in any hole at all. On the way, there's a false floor we have to jump over and can't use Fairy Force since there's a block wall on the far side of it. It's after the 3rd statue, 2 tiles after the statue, and is 4 blocks wide. After we pick up the cross, we're heading back to the obvious hole and dropping down. The remainder is pretty straightforward, but there are 2 places of note. Here is a side corridor that leads to a Link doll. However, that jump is super hard without magic, and the hallway contains 2 magic draining bubbles and a blue iron knuckle. Personally, I don't think it's worth it. Either way, immediately down that hole is where we need to cast Fairy to get to the boss. If you're out of magic, keep falling and there will be a statue where you might pick up a red jar on the right. The boss, Barba, isn't too bad. Cast Jump if you want a little extra mobility to keep out of the lava. I wouldn't risk bouncing on his head, and his fireballs are easy enough to jump and dodge around once you get the timing. Okay folks, now we're in the home stretch. Now that we have the cross, we're ready to head to the town I told you to ignore before. Brave the now visible but still infuriating eyeballs and venture into the first door to grab the last spell of the game, Thunder. After this, we're headed to the Great Palace across a graveyard and a sea of lava. Sprint through the graveyard because that's just a horrible place to be. After one more bullet hell area, we're onto the lava tiles. The easy fights aren't so bad, but there are a number of event tiles and caves to maneuver across. The name of the game is to avoid all the event tiles, not only because the lizard men are a bit obnoxious, but really because they all have this horrible 4-tile lava pit. As we know, Link can make that without casting magic, but do you want to bet your life on executing that jump at least 3 times, or otherwise having to spend magic on the jump spell to do it? Just be patient in the enemy encounters and wait for the eyes to come to you. The caves are fairly benign at this point, and after a bit of a slog, we arrive at the sanctuary that is the Great Palace. I say sanctuary because if you game over here, as long as you press continue, you will respawn right at the front door. The Great Palace is a proper maze with numerous dead ends, illusions, and is made worse with several unique and powerful enemies. This one I'm going to walk you through. The most important code to break here is that there are 4 times you encounter this room layout. In the order you reach them, go left, right, right, left. That alone will solve your life's problems in the Great Palace. Left, right, right, left at these rooms. Aside from that, I don't tend to stop and fight almost any enemy in this place. The dungeon also has a few secret rooms in the long elevator shafts that usually have ye old 50-50 statues to stab at if you're so inclined. The first encounter is the bouncing firebird, and on no occasion do I recommend fighting these guys. Do your best to run through and bounce to safety, as they'll usually tear your life bar to shreds. The first hazard is just a fake floor, so jump at the pillar and we'll be good. The next new encounter will be a horrible bird version of the iron knuckle that jumps, which conveniently are also what you get 50% of the time when you try to get a red jar from the statues or blocks in this palace. Run. Continuing the path, we'll eventually meet the blue version of this monster. In the first room we meet him, stand 4 blocks up, a little bit back from the edge, and just stab him in the face when he jumps. In rooms without this advantage, the answer will be to run for your life. Further on, we'll encounter a room like this, and it has some good stuff in it. To our left, being careful of the blobs, a rare Link doll, and to the right, if you don't fall in the pit, a fairy. Okay, last intersection folks, and as we head left, break some blocks to fall through the floor. Hang a right, up stab to avoid the giant blob attack, and we encounter our last real hazard before the bosses. I'll come back to this room a second time in a bit because there's a fun glitch you can do here, but to play like a normal person we have to walk partway across this bridge and fire Link into this black hole. On the left down here there are 2 blocks that could have red jars. Hang a right, and here we are at the legendary Thunderbird, and the entire reason we have the Thunder spell. Cast this first, otherwise it can't be damaged. Cast Jump, and of course Shield if you have the magic to do it, and fire away at the head. It's best to be patient because it's easy to get bounced around between all the fire, and Thunderbird takes an awful lot of damage to get through. Stepping back to that lava bridge, there's a glitch to be done that lets you skip the Thunderbird. Cast Jump and have the fairy spell at the ready. Keep walking till the hole we're supposed to go into is around the left edge of the screen, and cast Fairy while Link's sprite is in the status bar. This will warp us to the roof of the room below. Once here, have the fairy spell ready to go again, walk right till you're about here, jump and cast. Voila, no more Thunderbird. But it's not dead, so if you die, this trick will have to be repeated. Either way we do it, it's time for the final boss, the OG Dark Link. Cast Shield, hang out in the corner, and stab or duck stab as fast as your hands will allow, and 9 times out of 10 you'll come out on top. And with that, Zelda 2 is over. Link gets the girl, Shadow Link moves to the Water Temple and is relegated to mid-boss status, and you get bragging rights. I hope with some of the guidance here that this game will go from too difficult to beatable for at least a few of you, and maybe you'll grow to appreciate one of the most divisive Zelda games ever made.